So welcome to another special edition of Two Mr. P's in a podcast with me, Mr. P.
And the other Mr. P.
And we are back for another of our Chinwag sessions. And we are absolutely delighted to welcome the best-selling author and former doctor, Mr. Adam Kay.
Hello, welcome, Adam. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. It's sort of hard to tell this year, isn't it? But I think I'm all right.
Yeah. Well, we always start these sessions by asking, you know, with everything going on at the minute, how your lockdown has been, how your year has been, given everything going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the very, very lucky people who, hasn't, I've not lost any of the vulnerable or elderly people in my life. I live in a place with a garden, so so many of my mates are trapped at the top of 12-story buildings, and that gave them a miserable lockdown. So I guess, and also I'm used to working from home, and my husband also works from home, so it's not like we've been sort of suddenly exposed to each other for the first time in our relationship, which I know lots of people have. So we still like each other, and everyone's well. And so I guess what I've done is I've just kept my head down and written. I thought I was going to be performing, to I think maybe like 50, 60,000 people in my shows over the course of this year, and that evaporated. And unlike a lot of people who work in in this side of things, going on stages, I'm lucky I've got my writing as well. So I just knuckled down and did my homework.
Yeah.
Have you obviously being a doctor in your past years, have you had loads of people kind of messaging you like with symptoms and being like, do you think I should get tested, Adam? What's happening to me?
Luckily, I've been so long out of the game now, and I was never that good when I was even doing it, that my friends know that they can probably find a better medical professional to ask any questions.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I've been so looking forward to this. I'm absolutely buzzing to have you on. And you are joining us on the UK's #1 educational podcast. Well, educational comedy podcast. We've got to put that one in there as well.
Yeah, because we're not quite the top educational. We're not the top comedy, but we're the top comedy educational.
We found our niche. And obviously you had massive success with your first book, This Is Going to Hurt, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But you've got a new book coming out. Oh, it's out now, isn't it? It's out already?
It's out, yeah. It's been out a couple of days now.
Yeah, and the response has been unbelievable. I'm right in thinking it's #1 on Amazon at present.
Yeah. I mean, it's at the time we're speaking, it's #1. By the time it goes out, it'll probably be number 847. But, it's had a nice look.
I mean, I've had a copy. We got delivered a copy on, I think it was Friday, and honestly, we've read the first few chapters. It is absolutely amazing. I absolutely love it. My sons are obsessed with it. One of my boys has taken it to bed every night. He's been trying to redraw all the pictures. He's been telling me every fact that we've talked about. He's absolutely loved it. So,
that's wonderful. Thank you.
No, well, I'll leave you. What would people expect if they're gonna buy a copy of this? What would you say? Because I mean, it's a different target audience to your first book, going after sort of 8 to 12-year-olds as your demographic there. So, what would you say? What can the readers expect?
Well, what I hope it is a interesting, disgusting, hopefully funny look at the human body. It's something I've been always obsessed with, and I don't know, for whatever reason, I don't think the human body's always been something that kids necessarily find cool in the way that space or dinosaurs have always had that magnetic attraction for kids. And I wanted to share the things that I knew about the body that I thought they would enjoy if they were reading it in a slightly subversive book, rather than being sat down in a classroom and being, and having no option but to learn about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's packed full of, and I just love the sort of tone of it, how it's done in a very sort of humorous way. But you're right, it's absolutely packed full. I mean, what's great about it is, as much as my kids are learning stuff, I'm learning so much from reading.
I mean, it's not an accident. How can we expect, parents to remember any of this stuff from 20 years ago. Even that's if they even learned it in the first place. And we worked closely with educational consultants to make sure that we were hitting absolutely everything in the syllabus. So as well as all the disgusting fart and poo and wee based stuff, there's actually the proper topics they need to know about, sort of stealthily hidden in there.
I think it's so crucial. This is coming from someone who, how would you describe me?
Oh, don't even get me started.
Like, I find subjects difficult. I mean, I know I work in a school, but a book like this is so crucial because my memories of like the body and stuff is like the massive posters you used to get where one was a skeleton and one was just muscle. That, remember them? That was it. But then the labeling was too small for me to see anyway. So I couldn't, skull. It's like,
I can say one thing about this book: it's got a decent sized font. No one's going to say the label.
I actually, when I was reading it to my lads, I was like, Adam's going to need this once I finish because it's just right on your level.
It is. Well, this is the thing. I mean, I had a little scout through it before, and it does look quality. I can't write. I'm 1000%. I mean, my daughter's only 4, but she is interested in the body. But before we came, and we're going to do this tonight, which we've both been so excited for, I said to my daughter, I said, give me a question to ask for our guest tonight. And she couldn't really think of a question, but she said something about the ankles. I said, "Oh, can you point to your ankles?" And she just pointed straight to her nipples. And I was just like, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna purchase the book."
Yeah, it's something we need to work on.
I've never written for kids before, so I wrote it the same as I write for adults, because the kids in my life, I don't have kids, but like my godchildren, my nephews, my niece, I speak to them like I speak to normal people on the basis that I say normal people, I mean adults. I speak to them like I speak to adults, on the basis that how do you expect someone to learn the language and how the world works if you could you them? And I don't know how correct that is, but likewise, when I was sitting down to write this, I wrote the way I would write to anyone if I was explaining the liver, and I knocked out the swearing and some of the reference to the Thundercats and whatever other stuff I say to people my age. But yeah, I didn't want to be patronising, because I certainly remember being patronised by some of the stuff I read when I was that age.
Yeah. I mean, the only tricky thing for me at the minute is there are certain words and terminology that I'm trying my best to pronounce, and I'm just like,
you need the glossary that's in the back, because that's got all the pronunciation in it.
Oh, right, yeah. What was it? I got alveoli the other day.
Oh yeah,
with ravioli. So I got that one.
Oh, is that not a garlic mayo?
No. But yeah, so Kay's Anatomy, a complete and completely disgusting guide to the human body. I mean, the title Kay's Anatomy, is that a play on the Grey's Anatomy TV show?
I'm really pleased with that title.
Absolutely.
Because it's a pun that literally none of the target audience will get. Anyone who reads this book and remembers it will grow up thinking that's like the original. And if they ever hear Grey's Anatomy, they'll think, "Oh, that's a clever play on Kay's Anatomy."
They've made 27 seasons of it.
Do you watch those sort of types of programs as you were a doctor, or?
A bit.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is when you watch that sort of thing as a doctor, you just be like, well, that wouldn't happen.
Do you know what? I think we've talked about this before on the podcast, because it's very rare. I think probably only Teachers, if you remember the TV program Teachers a while back, that's probably the closest it's come to really depicting life in school. Usually there's so many examples of, films or TV shows in schools where we're just like, no, that'd never happen. You get, and I always wonder, like with a lot of the shows you get, is there anything that you've ever watched where you're like, no, that's a really accurate depiction of what it's like, and not necessarily the 24 hours in, because that's more reality based, isn't it?
Yeah. So of the dramas, I mean, there's an amazing show called Bodies, which was recently repeated on BBC Three, which came out years ago. It was written by Jed Mercurio, who's written any number of brilliant shows since, like Line of Duty. But I think that was one of his first shows, and it's really good, and it really got it. I remember I was watching Dr. Foster.
Oh yeah.
on the BBC, and I was sat on the sofa with James, my husband, and there was some scene in a surgery, and he said, "Was that accurate? Would that happen?" I was like, yeah, that would. But how has this GP got time to have all these dinner parties, let alone that sort of vigilante detective routine that she's doing? So I think they've got medical consultants who get the nuts and bolts of the words they should be saying, right? But I don't think I often see stuff that shows like that zooms out and shows the effect on people's life.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's what your first book did absolutely brilliantly, didn't it? So, I mean, you said, obviously, you didn't fight, so it wasn't as difficult, sort of that transition to a younger target audience with this book. I mean, it's quite a lengthy one. It's quite a big.
Yeah, we've got lots of audience.
So, I mean, how long did the process take? Has it been something you've been considering for a while, or?
Yeah, something that's been brewing for a while. And I've been sort of making notes and having a think about how I'd go about it. But I found it really enjoyable to write.
Yeah.
Because it's something that I'm genuinely interested in. And so when I sat down at my laptop, it flowed quite nicely, and it was a fun exercise thinking of analogies. Like, it all makes sense to me. But how do I explain how the neurons work? Or if I don't just want to say 100 trillion, because I think that endless numbers are sort of bewildering. So finding interesting ways of describing huge numbers. That's 1,000 times more than the number of galaxies there are, or this is the same number as the number of cats there are in the world, or the number of hamsters that go around the sun, or just thinking of interesting analogies. I just sort of enjoyed it, really.
Oh, brilliant.
I watched your interview on This Morning. I think, was it last week or the week before?
Last week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it's a bit of a come down, leaving Phil and Holly and joining us, I have to say. But I loved your message about how you wanted children to kind of be obsessed with learning about the body, like they are with things like spaceships and computer games and stuff like that. And I think that's a brilliant message, because there definitely isn't anything like this that I've seen recently. And I agree, to get children away from their Xboxes, the PlayStations, and actually learn funny but real facts, interesting facts is really, really fantastic.
Because they're reading my facts about poo, they're hopefully also reading the rest of it, and they will absorb it, and it's interesting stuff, and it's also important stuff. We need to know how our bodies work, and I haven't just talked about how your brain works. I also talk about how the brain sometimes works differently. I talk about depression and anxiety and panic and ADHD and autism, and things that the kids who are reading it, they might have themselves in their life, or it might be in their friends' lives, and it's all stuff that they need to know about. And for every organ, there's a lot of it can and does go wrong. So I've not shied away from that.
No.
And we've even talked about death a bit, because I don't think there should be taboos.
No, absolutely.
And I'm able to sit down and really think carefully about the best ways of presenting some of this information. So, and if a kid asks a difficult question to their parents, they're not necessarily in that rarefied position. So hopefully it can be a resource that parents can use with their kids for some of the tricky stuff.
And do you think that's been the issue in the past? So I know you've sort of mentioned there that you didn't have the most engaging sort of experience of learning about the body when you were at school. Do you think it was that because there's so many sort of taboo subjects with it when we talk? Because we've talked before about how dire sort of sexual education is at school, because it's still a bit more of a taboo subject, isn't it? And so and then when you listen to some of the stories from your first book of This Is Going to Hurt, you're sort of like, this is something a lot of people need to know, so they don't make the mistake of,
I think certainly when I was at school, a lot of this stuff was presented in quite a dry way.
Yeah.
And it just became another subject. You did physics, and then you did biology, and then you did maths, and I don't know, there are experts in physics and bio and maths and things who will be able to give their subject the best possible showing. I thought for the one that I love, I want to make sure that there is a way in. And even if you're talking about difficult stuff, you can, it doesn't have to sound dry, and you don't have to, tell kids what to do or what to think. You can just present some facts and allow that, however old they are, they're grown up enough to have the thought process to work out what they want to do.
Yeah, and I love what you said there about putting everything in context, because you do that. So far from what I've read, you do that absolutely brilliantly. So when it is, you've got so many platelets in your bloodstream, and then you'll give it a context. So for like my boys, they can start to really visualize what that would look like, and it's absolutely fascinating when you start really thinking about these machines we have that we just don't really appreciate how incredible they are as sort of machines. They are.
I agree. And we work very hard to like give the organs a bit of a personality, that they were distinct from each other. Because like when I was starting to put it together, I would ask like my husband and various mates who aren't from the medical profession just little questions, and like pretty much no one knew the difference between what the liver and the kidneys do. So I thought, well, they need to look totally different and be totally different, have different personalities, so that, if you've used this as a way of learning it, then you'll obviously know they're different, and you'll hopefully have the little cartoons in your head.
Yeah. I don't know whether you were doing a poker face then when you said about like, I was asking friends about what the difference between liver and kidneys. I was sat here thinking like, oh God. And then you went, yeah, right. Totally.
It's funny because you cover, like you said there, plenty of conditions that people might suffer from, and it's funny because as we were reading a couple of chapters, there was one point, I don't know what it was, but I was like, yeah, your Uncle Adam's got that. Yeah, your Uncle Adam's got that. Because this guy has like a permanent residence in the hospital. If you got his hospital file, it says,
yeah, it's like it's one of them files that the worst employee has with all like the record cards and stuff in. Yeah, there's been a fair few. I mean, I got diagnosed with ADD in secondary school. My mum was fighting for it, wasn't she, for years? Every report I ever had was like, oh, he's really, what was it? He was like, he's got it all there. He just can't concentrate. I mean, there's one report where I got absolutely slated until it got to the music one, and it was like, Adam can clap his own name. And that was like the bonus. That was like, oh, can I get something? And then I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in the week before my first freshers week. So it's like, not that has any context to it, but it's just, I do have a bit of a history.
Yeah.
Frequent one. Yeah.
So here's a question that I was thinking, because obviously the book is packed full of facts. So on a scale of 1 to, like a percentage, 1 to 100, how many of those facts would you say you already knew compared to how many you had to then research yourself?
I think I knew most of it myself, but I did then check everything. And I didn't just and I gave it to a bunch of doctor mates to have a read through, because I thought it's going to look pretty ropey if I've sent all these kids off, with totally incorrect knowledge about it. I've always been interested in it, and so I've always been good on a pub quiz for any questions about the body that come up. But the interesting thing is, quite a few of the people who read it, the doctors who read it, were like, I didn't know that thing. And there was one particular fact that none of the doctors knew, which is, like the sleep in the corner of your eyes when you wake up. That's got a name, which is gound, Gound.
Right.
And a few of them were like, yeah, never knew that.
I'll use that tomorrow in class. You got a bit of gound in your eye.
What's gound? You see?
Because we were going to ask, like, if when we go into school tomorrow, if you could give us one fact that we can just drop that knowledge bomb in school tomorrow, and it'll make all our pupils just sort of go, oh my, that's amazing. What would you say is the one fact that you...
Okay. I mean, it's quite a good fact that your blood contains gold. I quite like that. There's not much. You
Yeah.
have to drain all the blood from an entire full football stadium of people to get enough for like a small ring or something.
So Spandau Ballet were onto something, weren't they?
Yeah, no, exactly. There's the fact that your nose can tell the difference between a trillion sets different smells. Wow. And a trillion is, what's that? That's 10 times the number of people who've lived on Earth since the beginning of time. In your life, you'll eat 30 tons of food, which is about 20 hippos worth. You make 600
60 for Adam.
Yeah. If you unfolded your brain, it would be as big as a pillow. The longest ever fart was 3 minutes. And there's a lot of good facts.
They are unbelievable facts, but I'm worried about the last one you said. If I go into my class tomorrow and go, you know, the longest fart on world record is 3 minutes. I know a kid will be like, oh, all right, here we go.
Yeah, exactly.
See that as a challenge. So which, if you were to pick one part of the human anatomy that is your absolute favourite, that you enjoyed writing about the most or just fascinates you the most, what would it be, would you say?
I'm going to go with the brain because it's the most amazing bit of kit. And we really, really, really still don't know quite how it works. Yeah. And I think that's the chapter that if some archaeologist digs this book up in 100 years' time, everyone will point at and laugh and say, God, we really didn't know much about the brain. Yeah. It's like even stuff that should be fairly basic, like how memories are stored or what dreams are. And this sort of stuff, it's all a bit sort of...
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, yeah. Is it so? I can't remember the complete fact, but there's a percentage of our brain that we actually use. That's always...
No, that's an incorrect fact.
Oh, is it?
People go, use 10%.
See.
But no, lots of people think it. But if you only use 10% of your brain, then you know if someone stuck a knife through your head, there'll be a 90% chance that your brain would be fine, and that's not the case. We use all your brain. If any part of the brain is affected by a stroke or an injury or something, pretty much it has some sort of effect. We probably understand 10% of what the brain does, but that's slightly different.
So many teachers will be gutted with that. Like that is the go-to line. Just like, come on, you only use 10% of your brains. Let's open it up.
I mean, is there any other like false truths that you hear people say all the time that you just know for a fact?
Loads. There's the fact that, you know, you'll get a cold if you go out with wet hair.
Oh yeah.
It's nonsense. You know, a cold caused by a virus. An airborne transmission, nothing to do with the, you know, how wet or otherwise your extremities are.
Yeah. What's the crusts of bread one?
You get curly hair.
Is that curly hair? Is that just a joke?
Yeah.
I think
I could have told you that one.
Yeah. In fact, in the book, at the end of every chapter, I do this sort of true or poo section where sort of I say something and then let the kids guess what it is, or to be honest, the adults guess. And
no, I did when I had a little flick through before. I saw a couple of them true or poos, and there was a few that were just. I mean, we've got some here, haven't we?
Yeah, the one that is just on the one the blood contains gold. Gold.
But again, if I told my class that, they'd be going home and go like this.
And it's great because like we were reading the blood chapter last night, and I really like the way that you then will explain about sort of giving blood and how important that is, and just some really nice key messages about helping each other, helping obviously the NHS with things. Was that
looking after yourselves and you know, healthy ways of not just living but healthy ways of thinking. So people who have certain conditions that were born with or develop don't feel that they're abnormal in any way, and they know it's just who they are and it's just a part of them. And I talk, you know, quite a bit about body image because I know that's a big thing that affects kids, and I think it's hopefully helpful for them just to have some sort of sensible, reassuring advice. If I can make them trust me through the funny bits, hopefully they'll, you know, that sort of stuff will sink in.
Absolutely. And I think that's important to get them to understand, you know, if there is someone in their class who might, you know, suffer from a condition, and just have a bit more awareness and empathy about, you know, what it's like.
Absolutely. No,
It's
it's
so
all
important.
about knowledge. You
Yeah.
know, people are mean to people, or or dismissive of people, often just because they don't have the information. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that that's the first step.
Oh, absolutely. No, it is. It's absolutely brilliant. So yeah. So our podcast, we talk a lot about school and what you know, the ins and outs of what happens in school. So, what sort of pupil were you when you were at school? How was school for you?
Am I allowed to say little shit?
Well,
us Adams are the same.
Must be something in the name.
Yeah. So I was. So I went to an all boys prep school, and then
Yeah.
minor public school in South London. And you know, I'm not totally convinced that that's the ideal environment to learn how to socialize.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't speak to girls pretty much until I went to university, and I was like, oh wow. Um, uh, and I went to the sort of schools that put huge value on playing as many musical instruments as possible, or doing as many sports as possible, and let's get as many GCSEs as possible, like it was some sort of horrendous competition. And I think I did thrive in that, and my parents certainly sort of pushed me towards that. So I was quite bookish and sort of competitive with it in a way that I think probably isn't particularly healthy. I think there was too much emphasis put on exams, and not just like the ones you have to sit. They would make up fake exams like twice a year that you just had to do. You had to revise for them. So we had and I did lots of music, so I was like the music nerd rather than, I don't know, it's like in Mean Girls or something where you just have to choose a tribe, and I chose the music clique. And you know, I was very fortunate to be in an environment where I could be like, and now I want to learn the saxophone, and now I want to learn the trombone, and that was possible to happen. And music has since been a big part of my life. But having read back through, so when my parents cleared out a big load of stuff, and I rescued some like exercise books and things, and I was like, yeah, I wouldn't have liked you, 12-year-old Adam.
Yeah. So what would you say was your favourite subject when you were at school?
Probably English.
Yeah. I was thinking that. I was wondering whether it might have been science, obviously with the going into medicine, but then obviously your gift for writing. I wondered if English was up there.
Yeah, I did always enjoy writing. I was slightly strong-armed into having a, inverted commas, for anyone listening rather than watching, sensible, you know, occupation to go into. So a combination of the school and the fact that I came from a family full of doctors meant that there was a fairly short list of acceptable professions, and doctor was one of the top ones. Also, I'm from a Jewish family where that's a pretty trump card. My son, the doctor, and so it was all leaning that way. And I don't blame my parents in the slightest for it, because everyone wants the best for their kids. Absolutely. And you know, they knew that being a doctor was a safe job, a good job, a great job, and a hugely rewarding job. And they wanted that for me, and they knew what a nice life it could, and fulfilling life it can give someone. It wouldn't have occurred to them that I might have gone down the road of art or music or writing or journalism or something like that. And they, you know, there's I'm one of four, and we all had fairly similar trajectories through university. Whereas James, my other half, his mum's a teacher, and his dad worked in advertising, and all four of them have ended up in either TV work or music and that, or journalism and that kind of thing. Because, but you know, for James's dad, that was the safe, sensible, road well travelled to go down. So I didn't really think too much about where I was going, but I didn't have no interest in science, obviously. But I think if I was left to make all of my own decisions, I'd have probably gone down the English road. But then again, why would you let any teenager make all their own decisions?
Absolutely.
Well, it's all worked out. It's
best of both worlds. Yeah. What would you say was the subject you absolutely hated? I mean, I get a sense in the book it's maths for some reason, as maths teachers take a bit of a bashing.
Yeah. Sorry, maths teachers. It just sort of, I couldn't get interested.
Yeah.
I could sort of do it. I was like I could do an acceptable level of maths, but I don't think for whatever reason I ever got the bug.
Yeah.
It didn't give you the passion.
Yeah. But then again, I've sort of, it can be done right. And like the brilliant people like Simon Singh, and I've sort of, I've looked at some of his stuff online, and I was just like, oh, wow. If you'd have taught me like that, I'd have liked maths as much as I like the rest of it. So religious studies, I didn't really, I'm sorry, God, and everyone who teaches religious studies, but it was very, very Bible-y. Yeah. And I'm sure that these days it's a lot more world religion and 360 degrees. But, I learned a bit too much gospel, and that was probably the one I was like, oh no, Zari next.
Yeah. Was there any teacher back in the day that sort of had a real positive influence on you?
Yeah, there were a few. There was a great English teacher called Mr. Northcote Green, and I had a physics teacher called Mr. Woods, and I remember them in particular. In fact, I remember specific moments where this English teacher, there was a piece of work I'd written, and it was a poem, and he said, that's really, really good. And that was the first time that a teacher had actually come up to me. I'd had obviously a piece of paper marked, and I had feedback sort of secondhand after parents' evening, but that was the first time a teacher had said that to me. A grown-up had said, that's really, really good. And that made me think, oh, wow, cool. And it's weird. I mean, that's the best part of that's over 25 years ago, and I can even remember the classroom it happened in.
Absolutely.
Verbal feedback. This is what you fight for, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all
rather than the written marking, it's all about that,
Yeah. I actually had one of them moments today, believe it or not. A mum came to the door, and I went to answer the door today, and the mum said, "Oh, are you Mr. P?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And she said, "Oh, my little girl came home from school the other day, and she said that someone had called her a name, but then you announced to the whole class that she's not that name, that she's brilliant." And I remember it happening. And I'm not joking. I don't know what's happening to me at the moment. I don't know whether it's all the COVID-y stuff, but I'm a very highly emotional guy. And I was just kind of like, thanks a lot. Take care. Like nearly crying.
But you realise that these things have a profound effect. I mean, I didn't lay down a huge number of memories at school, other than sort of having facts drilled into me. Oh, here's a weird thing. This is my main memory of school. So it was a place called Dulwich College in South London, and it churned out people like P.G. Woodhouse and Raymond Chandler, but also Ernest Shackleton, who was your bloke who went to the poles in his boat.
Yeah.
And there was a film called The Perfect Storm at some point when late 90s or something.
Yeah, 99, I think, yeah.
And that was a big deal. And suddenly he became, but previously to that, no one had heard of this bloke. Yeah. And his boat, the James Caird, was just out in the school, like totally open. There was like these cloisters that connected a couple of buildings. This boat was sat on some fake rocks. And if you were first out of when the bell went and you ran downstairs, you could eat your crisps at break time in the boat. And so And so, I mean, dozens of times I think I'd probably I'm not going to say I put my name in a compass in the boat because I'm probably going to prison, won't I? But, but I definitely sort of ate my blue ribbons bar or whatever in that. And then I went back to the school quite recently. They wanted me to give a talk to some prospective medical students, which I was obviously happy to do. I love speaking at schools and in prisons, which are not totally dissimilar places, and they're actually much more interested in what I'm saying in prison. But I went back to the school, and the boat is now in this hermetically sealed container with perfect moisture and temperature control.
Wow.
Oh God, better not mention that I used to have my crisps in there.
We have like features on the podcast, and one of them's like the random things you only find in primary school, and that's got to be up there as one of the most random things. Just a boat in the playground. Yeah,
it was inside. It was covered, so it wasn't totally out in the open. Although it would have been fine. I mean, it went to the South Pole or wherever he did.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also I learned weird vocab at school. So like for whatever reason, you ate lunch in the buttery. The school shop was called the commissariat, and I don't know any better. It's school. Why are they teaching words? You sort of if you graze your knee, you go to the sanitarium. It's like this is a weird word. So I went to university, not just never having spoken to anyone who wasn't a posh boy, but with this totally wrong vocab of what half the stuff's called.
Just imagine you're making new friends, like you come into the sanitarium, they're like, what? Right, so we have to sort of quickly mention your first book, This Is Going to Hurt, which was absolutely incredible. Am I right in thinking it was the best-selling book of 2019? Is that right?
Yeah, it could well have been. Lots of people bought it, or one person bought it lots of times. Whatever happened, lots of copies changed hands.
Yeah, I mean, did you ever expect it to be as big as what it? No, I mean it is, but I mean, as you were writing it, did you think this is?
No, I really, really didn't expect it. So between medicine and this sort of the writing job I do now, I worked and still work to a certain extent in telly doing scripts, and so I knew lots of people who'd written books before. Because sort of as soon as you become sort of an L-list celebrity, one of the people I'm writing for, someone offers you a book deal, and then you get. And what tended to happen was, you would go to a book launch and drink some, warm Chardonnay in a too hot room, and then they'd do a speech, and then 48 to 72 hours later, the book had completely disappeared from the world, and it was never spoken about again. So I assumed this was what was going to happen. I was propelled into doing it because these were diaries I'd kept while I was working as a doctor.
Yeah.
But when the junior doctor strikes happened 4 or 5 years ago, I thought if people really knew what it was like on the front line of medicine, then the government would never get away with the stuff they're saying, or they're striking as they're being greedy and they want more money and all that. Yeah. So I didn't really care if 20 people read it. If 20 people read it, those are 20 people who next time the government go for the doctors, they won't believe it. And so I had in my mind what would happen to the book, and then it sold and it kept selling, and it snowballed, and it was, I couldn't have predicted it at all. No, one of the first people who read the book was my mother-in-law, who's a primary school teacher up in the Borders in Scotland, and she read it and said this could have been set in a school.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, teacher after teacher gets in touch, because it's easy to get in touch with an author these days through Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Teacher after teacher says it's exactly the same. Huge underfunded public bodies relying on the goodwill of individuals, to pick up the slack and make sure that kids get educated.
Yeah, and do you know what? It was one of my questions going further down. Like when I read it, that was exactly what I felt. It's like this could just so easily be a commentary on what's happening in schools and what's happening in education. And I think what made it amazing is it just, the emotions it evokes. Like I actually listened to it as an audiobook when I was driving down to, I think I was driving down to Barry in South Wales. So I had a right trek and I listened to it. And, you know, 1 second you're laughing your head off at some of the stories you share about some of the things you saw and some of the stuff that went on. But then the next minute, floods of tears. I remember I think it was the last sort of story you shared, which was the point where you decided to leave as a doctor. And I remember I listened to that last part on my way to the school in the morning. And I remember just sitting in my car for like 10 minutes and just blubbing and just crying through that story, because it was just so, I mean, obviously really well written, but I think that's the one thing that most people who've read it would say, it just really resonated. And you got such a sense of what it is like working in NHS that you don't get on telly and you don't really see elsewhere. And I think if that was your intention, to really open people's eyes to what it's like in this broken system and you know, that the government don't value, I think it was definitely achieved.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to tell like one doctor's story that hopefully represented, you know, a bunch of other doctors. And, you know, and I've heard from, you know, a lot of people who aren't in the profession saying that they hadn't realized it was as bad as it was.
Yeah.
And also I heard from an awful lot of doctors saying until they'd read that, they thought they were the first doctor who'd ever cried in a locker room, you know, when something bad happened, because there's a culture in medicine that you're a bloody doctor and you bloody get on with it.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy, because the culture needs to be talking about the tough days, because there'll be the same in teaching. I'm absolutely certain.
Absolutely.
There are the tough days, and the worst thing you can possibly do is just put it in a box and take it home.
Absolutely.
I think it's so true. I mean, obviously we're nowhere near like the talent of what you did with your book, but our podcast, we received quite a lot of messages off teachers, just going off what you said about being the same kind of unappreciated profession, and teachers saying that they just need that little bit of, realization that it's not just them. So we'll be talking about kind of mistakes that we've made, or mistakes that I've made a lot. And, you know, they'll be saying like, I'm so glad you did this, because I did it and thought, that's it, I might leave teaching. I mean, we have had a lot of...
I've had quite a few, because I mean, what I try and do because I've, you know, for the past few years been sharing as much as I can online about teaching, and you know, I'm very passionate about trying to help as far as well-being and workloads concerned. And you know, I think again, that's what was so amazing about your book, is that it really did resonate, and like you said there, you must get so many messages of teachers who just go through the same sort of struggle, really. And I get so many teachers, it's the same as what you've just said there about doctors, who think that they're the only ones who you know, struggle and that sort of thing. And I think things like social media doesn't really help, does it? Because that, you know, I don't know what it's like if it's the same with doctors, but with teachers, you tend to only see people not showing off, but sort of sharing what's been great in their class and what's fantastic.
I think it can provide a support network often
absolutely,
for people who would struggle to say to their, you know, their mate in the staff room, I've had a really rough day of it, and they might find it much easier as an anonymous Twitter account or as a member of a Facebook group. But yeah, it can also be a very toxic place on social media. But I think whether it's a person that you speak to in real life down the end of the phone or type to anonymously on a Facebook group, it's so important to have a shoulder to cry on and someone just to sense check. You know, you always think you're overreacting when actually you're just normally reacting, and someone to say to you, it's fine to be stressed about that, or, you know, so just a dispassionate, you know, pair of ears to say, maybe what you need to do is speak to the parents, maybe what you need to do is speak to your head, maybe what, just because otherwise these thoughts are in your head, and chances are you're not going to come up with the best solution at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep.
Yeah. And just saying about your This Is Going to Hurt book, I've never seen it. I mean, it was released in 2017, if I'm if I'm right.
Yeah.
I've never seen it in like Home Bargains, Knockdown, one of them books that's in like the bargain bucket. So I mean that shows class, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Did you see I've seen like Amy Child's books in there, her autobiography after the first year of Towie. I mean that's the levels. You are levels above.
and right in thinking it's going to be a TV show, is that right?
It is going to be a TV show. It's going to be on the BBC over here and AMC in the States. Hopefully shooting very soon. World-changing pandemics allowing. But yeah, that's going to be really exciting. And it's much like the book, it's going to be a comedy drama. So sort of, because I don't think you could do a fair depiction of the NHS or indeed teaching that was either just a straight drama or a straight comedy, because they exist somewhere between the two, and
absolutely
get the balance right on that.
And how much are you involved with that, or is it just?
Yeah, I'm fairly involved. So I've written all the scripts, and I'm playing all the parts. So, I've written all the scripts, and it's. I mean, I'm really excited with the team who are involved. The production company are brilliant, called Sister Pictures, who made Chernobyl and things like that. Ben Wishaw's playing the lead. Lucy Forbes is the director, who done various shows like End of the Bleep World. You won't allow me, with your swearing rule, to say the actual title of the show. But yeah, no, I'm really excited about it.
Did you get to choose who played you? Do you have any influence on that?
I was involved in the discussions, which is weird because it's like the standard dinner party conversation. Who would play you in a thing of your life? And now we're sitting in some sort of windowless basement, sort of going through lists of actors and saying, yeah, who would play me? And Ben Whishaw was far and away our sort of top choice. I think he's a stunning actor. He's a national treasure. He's good in everything he does. He's
the voice of Paddington, isn't he?
He's so versatile. He's so funny. Brilliant drama. It's comic timing spot on. And he's Paddington. What more can you ask?
That's great. I mean, I'm well excited about that. That's going to be amazing. So are you going to try and have a sneaky cameo? Surely, you can be lay on the bed.
Yeah, but I could be corpse number 7 or something.
So yeah. What was this? Oh, I've got another question here. So I loved the funny stories that you tell in that first book. I mean, if ever there was an advert for how we probably need to educate young people more about the do's and don'ts of what to do with your downstairs department. I mean, what would you say is the one story that, I mean, you can still tell now that would just make everyone just sort of either cringe or sort of laugh, that you actually had to experience when you were a doctor?
Yeah. So what's my greatest hit is your question. What's my yesterday? What's my creep? I mean, the one that served me well in 1,000 pubs and dinners, and is now one of the stories that people remember the most. Now it's been typed up in a book, is a slightly horrific number about an 18-year-old lad who was celebrating after receiving his A-level results, 3 C's, and was dancing on the top of a bus shelter, and decided to get down to ground level by sort of koala sliding down a lamppost, but he'd misjudged the texture of his lamppost, and he ended up degloving his penis. And there aren't any footnotes, obviously, when I'm telling the story, but if there was a footnote about degloving, it's like when a motorcyclist flies off their bike and their hands drag along the ground, so the skin and all the underlying structures are torn off. And I imagine that's probably not a story that can be told in class.
Well, yeah. What was it? What happened off the back of? Did he have to? Was it an operation?
Well, so he was left with like 2 millimeters diameter of urethra, coated with a like thin layer of what looked like tomato sauce, and if you think that grows back, then you really need to read my textbook.
And he was what, 18?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
But that's a cracking story.
And he'll hear the story back and hear 2 millimeters and just be like, ooh. It's just like, oh God.
Oh, wow. So you say that like the sort of motivation was when the government were sort of giving junior doctors sort of such a hard time. I mean, did you find that book then sort of therapeutic as an answer? It was Jeremy Hunt who was the Hunt being, you know, what did you find? I mean, that letter that you wrote to Secretary of Health at the time, State for Health, wasn't it? Do you think it has any impact, or did you find it therapeutic to speak on behalf of doctors?
I was speaking on behalf of myself and hoping that it was a view that was shared by doctors, which I think it was. And the book itself is lowercase p political. Just telling my story such as it was until the last couple of pages, where I do basically say to, you know, the people who are making the decisions to listen to the people on the front line. I'm sure that you and your listeners will share the sentiment, because it applies anywhere. The question is, if you knew what it was like on my ward, in my classroom, there's no way you'd be making these decisions. Absolutely. And it's a case of just listening to the people who are actually doing the job. There's something slightly mystifying how you can be in charge of education, and then suddenly you're in charge of defence, and then suddenly you're in charge of the treasury. Surely you want the person at the top, if not to have done the job, then who've just specialised in it for ages, and they've been, rather than having previously run the Department of Culture, and now suddenly you're in charge of every single teacher, school, university in the country. It makes no sense at all. So
or get sacked from
being background knowledge, at least listen to the people who do and immerse yourself in their world before you make mad decisions.
I was going to say, or get sacked as being a minister of something and then get made educational secretary.
As some sort of wooden spoon prize, because I guess it's only the future of every fucking child in the country.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if you were, let's say you were given the job of, we'll start with Secretary of Health, what would be, you know, the first couple of things you'd change, or what would you like to see change with NHS?
The answer is very, very easy, but at the same time impossibly difficult, because the answer is it needs a lot more money. And there are 1,000 little things you can change. Oh, how about this and how about that? But ultimately, if you want to provide the quality of service that we should be providing, if you want the 1.5 million people who work in the NHS to be able to do their job the way they trained for, it just needs more money. You can't have a system where it's stretched atom thin, where people are going so far above and beyond, because that's unsustainable. Because people burn out and people leave. You can do 2 people's job for a week when they're on holiday, and maybe a month, or maybe you could cover someone's maternity leave, but that can't be your normal. You can't be doing 2 people's job permanently, because eventually you'll just be like, what? No, I can't do it. I mean, what's the answer for education? Is it money again?
Money, definitely. I think that sort of underfunding, and I just think that with teachers, it's a case of trust. I think the biggest issue with a lot of schools is this obsession with accountability. So much time and effort for teachers is just wasted having to prove you're doing the job that so many of us are just capable of doing. So you just always feel like you're chasing your tail to prove to whoever's observing you, checking you, you know, Ofsted coming in to make a judgment on your
That presumably takes up a huge amount of your time.
Exactly.
But you could be doing what you're trained to do and you do well, which is actually teaching kids.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I find fascinating is just how you manage to do it, considering the shifts when you were working as a doctor, like the shifts. And I mean, sometimes I struggle in class if I've stayed up past 11 o'clock at night. But you seem to, I mean, run on empty, and surely that's just only going to have a negative consequences, because if you've not got, like you talk about in your book, with sleep, getting the right amount of sleep for your brain to function. I mean, it must just be so challenging to be able to having to constantly think and make incredibly important decisions when you've not been able to rest properly.
It sounds totally obvious. If, God forbid, someone needs an emergency operation, would you rather the doctor who's been there for 1 hour or the doctor been there for 19 hours, 6 hours longer than they were meant to be because there wasn't anyone to take over from them? I mean, it should be obvious, but there isn't this doctor to take over from them because there are huge numbers of gaps in every single rota, just like there are a huge number of gaps in the teaching rotas.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah.
Money.
And it's interesting. I think this is another real positive thing. Part of your book is I was listening to another podcast. John Richardson does one. I don't know if you've John Richardson and the Future Notes. And that's a really interesting podcast because they take different subjects and sort of, they ask three questions. They sort of go, how effed are we in the situation we are? How do we get this effed? And how do we un-eff ourselves? And it was interesting with the health one because they were basically saying in the UK, especially, we don't really have a healthcare system. We sort of have a sick care system. So the best way in which we could help our NHS is to sort of educate people around how to stay healthy.
Absolutely. I mean, that's an enormous thing we can do.
Yeah.
I think we need to take our health much more seriously. I think we're getting slightly better at it, but we can get an awful lot better still. There's a doctor called Phil Hammond who's been banging on about this for years and years and years, and we're slowly catching up with his way of thinking.
Yeah, but I think the book will help. I mean, the more children who read this, the more they're going to grow up understanding how to stay healthy and how to make sure you're exercising and eating healthily, and that's only then going to have.
I mean, hopefully, I'm not just telling people what to do. I will always explain why. Yeah. Because if someone says to you, "Don't drink alcohol," you immediately think, "Well, obviously, I'm going to do that now."
I'm getting bladdered.
Yeah. But if I never say don't do this. I just lay out the facts of what, a cigarette or a pint of beers, actually doing to the body. Yeah. And, and just say why that's why I don't smoke. And hopefully that'll help them come to the same conclusion.
Yeah, because we read that chapter last night about smoking. And it was a case, exactly what you said there. You don't say don't do it, but it's like, and then this happens, and then your lungs doing this, and then this is getting built up. And my boys just turned around and was like, why would anyone ever smoke? So.
I mean, if you read all that and you still want to do it, then, I've given them the facts.
I was going to say with the health and everything, it's a case of, if in doubt, there's gold in your blood. So gonna win a chicken dinner.
And we spotted a tweet from you where you were sort of tweeting a few of your chapters to certain Mr. President over in the United States.
Yeah. He didn't seem to quite understand the concepts of infections or the lungs. So, I thought, might help.
Did he get a response? Did it go?
No, so rude. Yeah.
Well, he's going to meet
a couple of months, so maybe he can reply to his tweets then.
Yeah. And what do you think about how we're handling the whole pandemic at the minute? Do you think? I mean, it's been great to see the respect and the love for the NHS. Do you think this is a turning point?
That's a good thing. I mean, it's certainly, if we're looking for the positives, I think there's been a lot of community cohesion. I think we've realised what an amazing thing we've got in our health service. But I think if you're going to say that no mistakes were made, probably weren't concentrating very hard. I think the decision for lockdown in the first instance was far too late, and I think lives were quite clearly lost. And in not saying that with hindsight, huge numbers of sensible people were shouting that as loud as they could at the time and being ignored. I thought what happened with the care homes was an absolute tragedy and an avoidable tragedy. I thought the PPE situation was a nightmare. Ultimately, we went into this crisis with an NHS that had no slack in it at all from systematic underfunding. And no one had listened to the doctors to say we have no buffer here in case something bad happens. But the NHS didn't collapse, and it didn't collapse not because of the people who made decisions. It didn't collapse because of the people on the ground who, left their families in case they brought this infectious disease back to elderly, relatives or vulnerable people they live with, who moved to their hospitals, who got pressure sores from their PPE, who, over 600 doctors and nurses and care staff lost their lives. But the NHS somehow didn't collapse. And then since then, they've been saying, the doctors have been saying, and the nurses have been saying, we need to get the testing right. We need to do the tracking and tracing right. We need to isolate people, and it hasn't happened. It should have happened. The stuff that happened with the schools and the exams, everyone could see. I heard from any number of teachers seeing this exam coming towards them like the lights on a train when you're standing on the track, and was anything done? Of course it wasn't. And now here we are in this horrible situation where the NHS is about to have another onslaught, where these poor bloody students locked up in these halls of residence they should never have been sent to in the first place, in plague pits. And it's just miserable. I'm glad it's not me making the decisions, because they're impossibly difficult decisions to make. But at the same time, I wish they'd made some different ones.
You have played a massive positive role, though, and a massive congratulations with the Love Letter to the NHS, the book that's raised a lot of money, hasn't it?
NHS, that was a lovely thing to be part of. I had this idea that, I was sitting at home feeling fairly helpless in the situation. I thought one potentially useful thing I could do would be to raise a bit of money for NHS charities, and pull together 100 famous people to write their memories of the NHS from themselves or their families or whatever. And did well, raised over £250,000 and counting.
That's amazing. Well done.
Very proud about that.
Super. Right, well, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. Yeah, and like I say, the book is available now. It is absolutely fantastic. I think every classroom needs it, really.
It's a stocking filler. I mean, that is, it's perfect. That absolutely perfect.
So, anything else that you want to mention or plug, or?
No,
have you rearranged your tour? Is your tour rearranged?
Yeah, so I mean, mostly for next year, but I am back in the West End until the start of November.
Brilliant.
And the first show, which I'm looking forward to, is a free show for NHS staff. So they need a night off more than anyone, apart from teachers, obviously.
You'll have to do the next one.
Yeah. We'll wait for our invite.
Yeah, up in Manchester.
Well, I think I'm playing the Lowry. I think I'm up there for Christmas. So yeah, come along. Send me a thing. I'm doing a Christmas show.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
I know Salford's a totally different place to Manchester. Everyone in Salford is at pains to point out it's nowhere near Manchester. Totally different place. But if you can somehow work out how to get to Salford, I'd love to see you.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Right. Well, thank you very, very much. We've absolutely loved it. It's been an absolute pleasure. So yeah, the book's available now. Get it. It's been an absolute pleasure to read. My kids have absolutely loved it. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Speak to you again.
Cheers. Bye.